Hey there, friends. Picture this. It's late at night. You're cozied up somewhere, maybe sipping tea or staring at the ceiling after a long day. And I'm here to take you somewhere unexpected, not to some grand adventure. Nope. We're diving into breakfast. Yeah, breakfast. That sleepy-eyed moment when you stumble into the kitchen, debating cereal versus toast, or just straight-up coffee because who has time for real food? But here's the twist. Let's rewind 4,000 years. Swap your toaster for ancient Egypt. Suddenly your breakfast, not so ordinary anymore. Now hold on to your hat. Before we get started, quick favor. If this story sparks even a flicker of curiosity, give us a like. Smash that subscribe button if you're here for the weird but wonderful rabbit holes I tend to wander down. Oh, and drop me a line in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? What time is it where you are? Are you eating breakfast right now? If so, I hope it's got more flair than what the Egyptians were working with. All right, dim the lights, lean in. Let's drift back to a time when mornings tasted, well, let's say, interesting. Today, we picture breakfast as eggs, bacon, maybe avocado toast if you're fancy. But in ancient Egypt, their mornings would have made your jaw drop. Imagine sitting down to a spread of stale bread and beer. Beer. You heard me right. Not the icy cold kind in cans, but something thicker, a sweet, murky brew made from fermented barley, almost like a liquid porridge with a kick. Kids drank it, adults drank it, everyone drank it. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. It was the OG energy drink. And the bread? Oh, they took bread seriously. This wasn't your Whole Foods sourdough. We're talking dense, unleavened loaves, sometimes packed with sand from grinding stones. Crunchy teeth, anyone? But here's the thing. Bread wasn't just food. It was life. Offerings to gods, wages for laborers, the heartbeat of daily survival. Now, historians still debate. Was this breakfast genius or survivalist hustle? Some say the beer was like a vitamin smoothie, loaded with calories and nutrients. Others whisper about rituals. Beer wasn't just a drink. It was sacred, a gift from the gods. And bread, symbolic of abundance of divine favor. So every bite, every sip, tied them to their beliefs. So, how's your morning meal looking now? A little less exciting, a little more, don't worry. We're just getting started. Ancient Egypt's breakfast table had more secrets to spill. Stick around. Let's unravel why their mornings were anything but simple. All right, folks, let's rewind the clock again. This time, we're zooming in on something that feels totally normal today. Bread. But in ancient Egypt, bread wasn't just a sidekick to your morning meal. It was the main event. Picture this. You're an Egyptian waking up to the Nile's golden sunrise. No coffee, no toast to go. Just one thought on your mind. Bread. It's your alarm clock, your comfort blanket, your, yep, today's happening ritual. For many Egyptians, the day didn't start until they bit into that first loaf. Now hold up. Before we dive deeper, let's clear the air. Ancient Egyptian bread? Not the fluffy stuff you grab at Whole Foods. Nah. We're talking dense, chewy, sometimes rock-solid loaves. And here's the kicker. Your social status literally shaped what you ate. Pharaohs. They had soft, pillowy bread that probably made their mornings feel like a luxury spa. The rest of us? More like a rugged flatbread or a biscuit that could double as a doorstop. Bread wasn't just food. It was your resume, your wallet, your vibe. Me. My bread's got artisanal sourdough vibes and a $12 price tag. Close enough? But how'd they make it? No KitchenAid mixers here. Just raw grit. Imagine grinding wheat or barley between two stones until your arms begged for mercy. Then mixing the flour with water, kneading by hand, and baking in a clay oven fueled by crackling wood. No timers, no preheat buttons, just patience, sweat, and a dash of hope. It wasn't a quick toast. It was a labor of love. Now here's where it gets wild. Bread wasn't just breakfast. It was worship. Yep, Egyptians baked offerings for their gods, loaves stacked on altars, infused with prayers instead of butter. They believed the gods would sip the essence of the bread, leaving behind just the crumbs. It's like divine happy hour, but with fewer cocktails and more carbs. To them, bread wasn't just survival. It was a love letter to the universe. And get this, some scholars think Egyptian bakers were the OG yeast whisperers. They stumbled onto fermentation, accidentally inventing fluffy bread centuries before artisanal was even a word. Was it science? Magic? A gift from the gods? Who knows? But give credit where it's due. They were baking pioneers. Oh, and here's a mystery for the history books. How exactly did they make bread rise? Fermentation, time, a sprinkle of divine intervention. Still debated. But next time you tear into a warm slice, remember, it's not just carbs. It's a bite of human ingenuity. So bread in ancient Egypt? It was more than food. It was life. Fuel for pyramids, prayers, and people. A symbol of abundance, devotion, and grit. So go ahead, take a bite of that toast tomorrow, and maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the Egyptians who started it all. After all, without them, we'd still be staring at flour, wondering, what now? All right, friends, let's keep rolling. We've already talked about bread, the humble hero of ancient Egyptian mornings. But now, hold on to your hats. We're diving into something that'll make your eyebrows do a little dance. Ready? The Egyptians didn't just break bread for breakfast. They broke out the beer. Yes, beer. Not the icy cold kind you crack open after work, but a thick, murky, semi-sweet brew that could probably double as a full meal. Picture yourself sipping that instead of your morning coffee. Sound wild? Or just confusingly charming? Here's the kicker. This wasn't some ancient party till noon thing. For Egyptians, beer was as everyday as toast. Kids drank it, farmers drank it, even priests poured it into rituals like it was liquid gold. Today we see beer as a party favor, but back then, it was survival fuel. Need calories? Grab a bowl. Need vitamins? There's your smoothie. Need a little spiritual boost? Oh, they believed this stuff could heal. So imagine your morning routine. A hearty bowl of beer, a hunk of that rock-solid bread, and boom, you're ready to build pyramids. Now let's get specific. This wasn't your IPA or craft lager. Ancient Egyptian beer? Think of it as breakfast oatmeal with a buzz. They brewed it by fermenting barley, but it was more porridge than a drink. Thick, grainy, and unfiltered. You'd scoop it up with a straw from a clay bowl, not sip it from a pint glass. And forget about hops or fancy spices. Their recipe? Simple. Barley, water, fermentation magic, and a dash of, we'll call this divine. But here's where it gets sacred. Beer wasn't just breakfast. It was worship. Temples offered bowls to the gods, believing the divine would sip the essence and leave the rest for mortals. Priests poured it into rituals to protect the pharaoh, bless the harvest or keep the Nile flowing. Beer wasn't just food, it was a love letter from the gods. So yeah, your mimosa doesn't quite compare. And historians, they're still arguing about its power. Some say it was a nutrient bomb, packed with protein, B vitamins, and gut-friendly probiotics. Others shrug and call it ancient Gatorade, a calorie fix, not a superfood. Either way, laborers guzzled it to survive 12-hour shifts under the desert sun. I'd take a bowl over Red Bull any day. Oh, and get this. While Egypt was brewing breakfast beer, the rest of the world was still figuring out how to boil water. Sure, their brew wasn't refined like ours, but it was revolutionary. Was it food, medicine, a sacrament? Maybe all three. Either way, it kept the wheels of civilization turning. So next time you raise a glass, spare a thought for the Egyptians. They didn't just invent beer, they invented the art of starting your day with a little magic in a bowl. And hey, if your morning routine feels weird now, just remember, someone out there once sipped beer for breakfast and called it holy. All right, friends, let's give that beer a little break and shift gears to something that might feel oddly familiar. Milk. Yep, that creamy white stuff we pour over cereal, or, let's be honest, chug straight from the carton when we're feeling rebellious. You're probably thinking, okay, finally something I recognize. But hold your horses. Ancient Egyptians didn't exactly sip milk like it was a modern breakfast ad. No cold cow's milk poured over granola here. Theirs came from goats, and for the bold, even sheep. Picture this. It's sunrise in ancient Egypt. The Nile's shimmering under the early light. A breeze kicks up, and you're not hitting brew on a coffee maker. You're heading to the goat pen. Fresh milk? That means getting your hands dirty, not grabbing a carton from the fridge. Not quite the convenience of today, but hey, it was the OG farm-to-table life. And goat's milk? It wasn't just a trend, it was a power move. Packed with nutrients, easy to digest, and probably tastier than you'd expect. But here's where the magic happens. Milk didn't stay milk for long. The Egyptians were early food hackers, turning it into yogurt and cheese. Yeah, your Instagram-worthy yogurt bowl? It's got ancient roots. Legend has it, yogurt was born by accident. Some milk left in the sun, a little fermentation magic, and voila. Not the most glamorous origin story, but hey, it worked. Soon, Egyptians were mixing it with honey and dates for a sweet, tangy breakfast snack. Talk about a throwback bowl. And cheese? Oh, they were crafting it. Curdle the milk, press out the whey, and boom, you've got cheese that lasts weeks. In a world without fridges, that's genius. Picture a chunk of tangy homemade cheese next to their daily bread and beer. Sounds rustic, bold, maybe even a little weirdly gourmet. Either way, it's not what you'd grab at Starbucks. But wait, there's more. Milk wasn't just fuel, it was sacred. Like bread and beer, dairy was a divine gift. Priests poured milk at altars to honor Hathor, the goddess of love and motherhood, often shown nursing from a sacred cow. So imagine starting your day knowing your breakfast was basically a prayer. Your morning latte, not quite as spiritually charged. Now, here's the plot twist. Historians still debate how much milk Egyptians actually drank. Some say lactose intolerance was real, making yogurt and cheese smarter choices. Others argue milk was more common than we think, maybe even a daily staple. But one thing's certain, these weren't just foods. They were survival hacks, spiritual symbols, and culinary legends rolled into one. So next time you pour a glass of milk, think of those ancient goat herders and their fermented genius. You're not just sipping breakfast, You're tasting history, and maybe, just maybe, honoring a goddess or two. All right, friends? Let's slow things down and savor something sweet. We're diving into honey, the golden glue that held ancient Egyptian mornings together. You're probably thinking, finally something I'd actually drizzle on my toast. And you're not wrong. Today we put honey on everything, yogurt, tea, even straight off the spoon when we're feeling fancy. But for Egyptians, honey wasn't just a sweet treat. It was liquid gold. And not just because it tastes like sunshine. No, this stuff was sacred, medicinal, and straight up magical. Picture this. It's dawn in ancient Egypt, the Nile's shimmering under the first golden rays, and the city's already buzzing. You stumble into your morning ritual, reaching for a clay jar of honey sitting next to yesterday's bread. Or even stirred into that thick beer we talked about earlier. Honey wasn't just for flavor, it was life. They slathered it on bread, mixed it into yogurt, and even used it to preserve food. But here's the kicker. They also believed it could heal wounds, soothe sore throats, and get this, help mummify bodies for the afterlife. Yep, honey wasn't just breakfast. It was immortality. But here's where it gets even sweeter. Bees. They were Egypt's original rock stars. The bee wasn't just a bug. It was a symbol of power. Pharaohs wore it on their crowns as a badge of royalty, especially in Upper Egypt, where it stood for unity and strength. And honey? It wasn't just food. It was a divine message. Bees were seen as messengers between humans and gods, which made honey a holy liquid. Imagine stirring a spoonful into your yogurt and thinking, this isn't just breakfast, it's a prayer. Now let's talk about how they actually ate it. Egyptians weren't just chugging honey straight from the hive. Nope. They knew how to layer flavors. Picture scooping yogurt into a bowl, drizzling honey over it, then tossing in dates, figs, or crushed nuts for crunch. Sounds like a modern-day parfait, right? But back then, it was pure fuel. Honey gave workers that extra jolt to survive pyramid building under the blazing sun. If I were lugging stones in 100-degree heat, I'd be asking for seconds. But harvesting honey, not as easy as it sounds. These folks didn't just prop up a few hives and call it a day. They built intricate clay beehives, like tiny mud brick temples for bees. Smoke, essential. They gently coax bees away before harvesting their golden treasure. Because honey wasn't just a snack. It was a luxury, reserved for priests, pharaohs, and special occasions. Common folks still got their fix, but it was like finding a $20 bill in your pocket. Rare, but worth the wait. Historians still debate how often Egyptians used honey. Some say it was everywhere, medicine, food, rituals. Others argue it was a VIP item, saved for the elite. Either way, one thing's clear. This wasn't just a sweetener. It was a bridge between earth and sky, life and death, work and worship. So next time you drizzle honey on your toast, pause for a second. You're not just adding flavor. You're tapping into a legacy thousands of years old. Just like the Egyptians, maybe you'll start seeing honey as more than a topping. Because for them, it wasn't just breakfast. It was a love letter to the gods, a taste of eternity, and a little golden reminder that sweetness is timeless. All right, friends, let's shift gears from honey's golden glow and step into something earthier. Grains. Yeah, I know. Grains might not sound like the most glamorous breakfast topic, but hang with me here. In ancient Egypt, grains weren't just food. They were everything. Wheat, barley, the whole crew. They were the unsung heroes of daily life. Imagine waking up to a warm bowl of porridge, stirred over a fire as the Nile glimmers outside your window. Sounds simple, sure. But for Egyptians, this humble dish was the heartbeat of their world. Picture this. You're sitting by the Nile at dawn, sunlight spilling across the water. In your hands, a clay bowl of thick, hearty porridge. Ground wheat or barley, maybe a drizzle of honey, a handful of dried figs. No instant oatmeal here. This is the OG breakfast bowl, slow-cooked with care, sweetened by the land itself. Grains were cheap, reliable, and wildly adaptable. They weren't just for porridge. They were the building blocks of bread, beer, and every meal in between. But here's the kicker. Grains weren't just sustenance. They were a promise. Every year the Nile flooded, painting the fields with fertile mud. Egyptians called this the gift of the gods, a yearly miracle that kept their pantries full. And when they harvested those golden stalks, they threw a party. The festival of Isis, the goddess of fertility, was their way of saying, "Thanks for the grains, thanks for the life." So when Egyptians ate their morning porridge, they weren't just filling their bellies. They were tasting gratitude, honoring the cycle of earth and sky. Today, we grab breakfast bars off shelves and barely think about where they came from. But for Egyptians, breakfast was a conversation with the land, the pioneers, and their entire community. Grains weren't just calories. They were survival, spirituality, and society rolled into one. And how'd they mix it up? Historians still debate it. Some say porridge was their go-to, while others think they whipped up grain cakes, or even an early muesli, though the recipes lost to time. Either way, one thing's clear. Grains were everywhere. They built pyramids, powered prayers, and kept the wheels of civilization turning. So next time you pour your cereal, pause for a second. You're not just eating breakfast. You're sharing a bite with ancient Egypt. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see that humble grain a little differently. Because thousands of years ago, someone stirred a bowl of porridge, looked out at the Nile, and thought, "This is where life begins." All right, friends, let's take a little detour. We've talked about bread, beer, and honey. But now let's peek behind the curtain of ancient Egyptian life and explore something a bit more layered. Let's compare breakfast at the palace versus breakfast in the fields. Because while both meals started with bread and beer, the gap between them, huge. Picture this. You're a royal princess waking up in a sunlit palace chamber. The Nile sparkles outside your window, and servants are already bustling to prepare your morning feast. Fresh figs, dates dripping with honey, warm flatbread straight from the fire. And yes, even that thick, porridge-like beer we've come to know and love. Your breakfast isn't just a meal. It's a ceremony. Every bite whispers, "Your royalty." Even the beer, probably strained through linen for extra smoothness. Fancy, huh? Now rewind the scene to a worker's morning. No palace walls here, just the golden haze of dawn over the Nile and the distant clang of chisels on stone. A laborer grabs a hunk of dense barley bread, scoops up some gritty porridge, and washes it down with beer straight from the clay jug. No servants, no figs from far-off lands, just fuel for the day's grind. But here's the thing. This wasn't starvation fare. It was a hearty, filling, and built to power pyramid builders under a blazing sun. If anything, this breakfast was a badge of grit. So what separated these two mornings? Variety and luxury. Royals feasted on imported dates, dried fish and honey, drizzled over delicate pastries. Workers? They stuck to basics: bread, beer, and whatever fruit grew nearby. But here's the twist. Both meals were rooted in the same staples. Bread was still life. Beer was still sustenance. Milk still carried whispers of the gods. The difference wasn't in the meaning of the food, it was in the access. And get this, the hierarchy wasn't just about indulgence. It was practical. Workers needed calories to swing hammers. Royals, not so much. Their lives were softer, less physical. So in a way, both breakfasts were perfectly matched to their roles. One lavish, one lean, but both designed to keep Egypt's wheels turning. But historians still argue, how basic were the workers' meals, really? Some say they had surprising variety, thanks to Egypt's fertile farms. Others insist the gap was stark. Nobles feasted, while commoners scraped by. Either way, one truth stands tall. Food wasn't just survival. It was identity, status, a love letter to the gods. So next time you pour your coffee or toast your bread, take a beat. Are you sipping like a pharaoh, or fueling up like a pyramid builder? Either way, you're part of a story that stretches back thousands of years. And hey, maybe your breakfast isn't so different after all. Just swap the clay jug for a mug, and you're golden. All right, friends, let's step away from the breakfast table for a moment and dive into something deeper. Something that ties ancient Egypt's daily rituals to something bigger. Because breakfast wasn't just about filling your belly, it was part of a grander story, a spiritual dance between humans, gods, and the rhythms of life itself. In ancient Egypt, food wasn't just fuel, it was a love letter to the divine. Picture this. You're standing in front of a temple, sunlight cutting through towering stone pillars like golden arrows. You're not here to eat, you're here to give. A plate of bread, a bowl of beer, carefully prepared, lovingly arranged. This isn't for you, it's for the gods. The Egyptians believed food wasn't just sacred, it was alive, with meaning. Every offering was a whisper. We see you. We thank you. Keep us safe. And in return, they believed the gods would share their power, their protection, their blessings. Now here's where breakfast gets holy. As the first meal of the day, it wasn't just about shaking off sleep. It was about setting the tone. Priests and priestesses would prepare breakfast offerings with their own hands, choosing ingredients not just for flavor, but for symbolism. Fresh-baked bread, thick barley beer, ripe figs. They weren't random picks. They were gifts that said, "Look what your Nile has given us." Because to Egyptians, the river wasn't just water. It was life. It was the goddess Hathor's breath. It was the heart of their world. And here's the thing. Offering food wasn't just a temple thing. It was a home thing, too. Many families started their mornings by setting aside a piece of bread, a spoonful of honey, even a few drops of beer for the gods. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They believed these tiny acts of gratitude would keep their homes blessed, their harvests rich, and their children safe. Breakfast wasn't just a meal. It was a bridge between earth and sky, between the human and the divine. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was. Some say it was for the elite. Others argue even farmers did it. But one thing's clear. Food wasn't just about eating. It was about connection, about saying, we're part of something bigger. So next time you grab your coffee or toast, pause for a beat. Sure, you don't need to start offering your oatmeal to the gods, but maybe, just maybe, you can appreciate how food has always been more than calories. It's a thread that weaves us into our culture, our memories, even our spirituality. The Egyptians knew this. To them, breakfast wasn't just the start of the day. It was the start of a conversation with the universe. And hey, if that doesn't make your toast taste better, I don't know what will. All right, friends, let's step back from the spiritual and dive into something a bit more down to earth. How breakfast in ancient Egypt was like a social mirror. See, food wasn't just about taste or fuel. It was a statement, a way to say, this is who I am. And breakfast, that first meal of the day, it was where status, community, and culture all met at the table. Picture this. You're the pharaoh, lounging in a palace where gold gleams off every wall. Your breakfast isn't just a meal, it's a showcase. Platters of figs, dates dripping with honey, thick slabs of bread, and that ever-present bowl of beer. Every bite screams power, wealth, and divine favor. This wasn't just for hunger, it was for impressing gods and mortals alike. Your meal was crafted by the best hands, served on silver, and designed to remind everyone, yep, I rule this place. But now, let's walk out of the palace and into the dust of the fields. For ordinary Egyptians, breakfast was simpler, but no less meaningful. Workers hauling stones or tending crops didn't get figs from far-off lands. Their mornings started with dense bread, gritty porridge, and that same hearty beer we've come to know. No gold platters here, but there was pride in the simplicity. This wasn't about luxury, it was about getting the job done. Fuel for the day, shared with family or fellow laborers, and here's the magic. Breakfast wasn't just food, it was glue. Whether royal or rural, meals brought people together. A bite of bread, a shared bowl of beer. These weren't just calories, they were connections, a way to say, we're in this together. In a world without texts or coffee shops, breakfast was your first chance to bond with those around you. But food wasn't just social, it was economic. Egypt's power came from its soil. The Nile's floods brought life, leaving behind silt so rich it turned the land into a food factory. Grains, fruits, veggies, grown in abundance, traded, stored, and shared. And who controlled it all? The pharaoh. Food wasn't just breakfast, it was politics. The Nile's blessings built pyramids, paid workers, and kept Egypt thriving. And let's not forget, food was also a rank marker. The pharaoh's table had imported spices and rare meats. The worker's bowl, simple, sturdy staples. Even within simplicity, there were layers. A rural family might sip fresh goat's milk, while city folks relied on bread and beer. Subtle differences, but ones that whispered, this is where you stand. Yet here's the twist. Bread and beer united them all. Pharaoh or peasant, everyone shared these basics. They weren't just food, they were identity. Offered to gods in temples, shared at home, traded in markets. They reminded Egyptians, no matter your rank, you're part of this story. So next time you grab your coffee or sit down to eggs, think of the Egyptians. Breakfast has always been more than food. It's culture, connection, and a quiet way to say, this is my world. And hey, if that doesn't make your toast taste richer, I don't know what will. All right, friends, let's shift gears from bread and beer and step into something a little sweeter and juicier. We're talking about fruits and veggies, the unsung heroes of ancient Egyptian breakfasts. Yeah, I know. When you think ancient diet, you probably picture porridge and flatbread. But hold up, Egyptians knew balance. Their mornings weren't just about carbs. They crunched on dates, savored melons, and even tossed cucumbers onto their bread. Sounds modern, right? Let's unpack it. Picture this. You're strolling through an Egyptian market at dawn, the Nile's shimmering in the distance, and the air smells like figs and fresh-cut melon. Stalls overflow with pomegranates bursting red, dates clustered like jewels, and watermelons so plump they practically drip summer. These weren't just snacks, they were fuel. For laborers, a handful of dates meant instant energy. For the wealthy, a golden fig drizzled with honey was morning luxury. Either way, fruits weren't rare treats. They were everyday magic. Let's zoom in on dates, the OG energy bar. Egyptians couldn't get enough of them. Sweet, sticky, packed with vitamins, they were the perfect grab-and-go bite. Imagine washing one down with that thick beer we've talked about, feeling that rush of sweetness hit your veins. Not a bad way to kick off pyramid building duty, huh? But here's where it gets deeper. Fruits weren't just food. They were symbols. Take the pomegranate. Its ruby seeds weren't just tasty. They screamed fertility, life, and the Nile's power. Eating one at sunrise, that wasn't just breakfast, it was a prayer. A reminder that life, like the river, keeps flowing. And then there's watermelon. In a desert climate, this was liquid gold. Grown along the Nile's banks, its juicy flesh was hydration in a world where the sun didn't play fair. Imagine biting into a wedge at dawn, the coolness waking you up faster than coffee. For Egyptians, this wasn't just refreshment, it was survival. Now, veggies? They weren't headliners, but they held their own. Onions, garlic, leeks, spicy, sharp, and packed with health benefits. Garlic, in particular, was Egypt's ancient antibiotic. Workers chewed cloves before shifts. Priests crushed them into offerings. And cucumbers? Sliced onto bread, they added crunch and a hint of green to an otherwise brown and gold diet. But here's the twist. How fruits and veggies showed up varied wildly. Common folks might stir dates into yogurt or slice melon onto bread. The elite? They had imported grapes, roasted meats, and cheeses glistening on silver platters. Yet even in luxury, there was a thread. Every bite tied Egyptians to the Nile's rhythm, to the gods' blessings, to the land that made life possible. So next time you grab a banana or slice a melon, think of the Egyptians. Thousands of years ago, they were doing the same, balancing sweetness with spice, tradition with nourishment, and always, always giving thanks to the river that gave them everything. All right, friends, let's pause the bread and beer tour for a moment and shine a light on something that might just be the real MVP of ancient Egyptian mornings. Cheese. Yeah, I know. When you think ancient Egypt, your brain probably jumps to pyramids, mummies, and all that golden desert mystique. But stick with me here. Cheese wasn't just a snack. It was survival fuel, a sacred symbol, and maybe even the OG protein bar of the Nile. Picture this. You're an Egyptian waking up at dawn, the Nile shimmering outside your window. You rub your eyes, reach for a hunk of crumbly cheese, and slap it onto a slab of bread. Add a dollop of honey, a swig of thick beer, and boom, you've got breakfast. Not exactly a charcuterie board, but hey, it worked. This cheese, it wasn't brie or cheddar. We're talking rustic, salty, feta-like slabs made from goat's milk. Simple, sturdy, and packed with protein to power a day of pyramid building or field work. But here's where it gets even sweeter. Cheese wasn't just food. It was culture. Egyptians mastered the art of curdling milk, pressing curds into solid slabs and aging them like pros. No refrigerators here. They relied on salt and sun to preserve their dairy gold. And get this, they might have even spiced it up with herbs, turning a humble snack into a flavor bomb. Now here's the kicker. Cheese had divine street cred. Enter Hathor, the goddess of love, motherhood, and fertility. She was often shown as a cow or nursing from one, because cows weren't just livestock. They were symbols of life itself, cheese and milk. They weren't just meals. They were gifts from the gods, reminders of nature's nurturing power. So when you bit into that cheese at sunrise, you weren't just eating. You were communing with the divine. And cheese didn't stop at breakfast. It showed up at lunch, dinner, and even religious rituals. Temples offered slabs to the gods, hoping for harvest blessings. Pharaohs packed cheese for the afterlife. Yes, really. It was practical, spiritual, and everywhere. Historians still argue, was cheese elite food or a people's staple? Some say it was luxury fare for nobles. Others insist even farmers nibbled on it daily. Either way, one thing's clear. Cheese wasn't just sustenance. It was identity. A thread connecting daily life, faith, and the land that fed them all. So next time you slice a wedge of cheddar or melt mozzarella on toast, tip your hat to the Egyptians. Thousands of years ago, they were already perfecting the art of cheese, balancing flavor, function, and a dash of magic. And hey, if it fueled pyramids and prayers, imagine what it can do for your day. All right, friends, let's shift gears from bread and beer and dive into something that might surprise you. Spices. Yeah, I know. When you think ancient breakfast, your brain probably jumps to porridge and flatbread. But hold up. Egyptians knew flavor. Their mornings weren't just about carbs and protein. They were spicing things up with herbs and seasonings that would make your modern kitchen jealous. Let's unpack it. Picture this. You're an Egyptian waking up to the Nile's golden shimmer. Breakfast's on the table. Bread, cheese, dates, maybe a bowl of beer. But here's the twist. You reach for a tiny jar of cumin, or coriander, and sprinkle it on like salt. Suddenly, that humble meal gets a flavor boost. Earthy cumin, citrusy coriander. These weren't just toppings. They were magic dust, turning simple bites into something special. And guess what? These spices are still kitchen staples today. Talk about timeless seasoning. But here's where it gets deeper. Spices weren't just for taste. Egyptians believed they were medicine. Cumin, said to calm a growling stomach after a heavy bread and cheese breakfast. Coriander, a digestive hero, easing bloating like ancient Pepto-Bismol. Imagine chewing a cumin-dusted bite of bread and feeling that warm, soothing glow. Not bad for a 4,000-year-old remedy, huh? And they didn't stop at cumin and coriander. Oh no. Egyptians had an herbal arsenal. Garlic, the OG immune booster. Workers ate cloves before shifts. Priests crushed them into offerings. Onions, the savory backbone of breakfasts, believed to ward off evil spirits. Mint, cooling and refreshing, perfect after a thick beer. Dill, mild and grassy, tossed into everything from bread to cheese. These weren't just flavors, they were protection. A way to say, keep me healthy, keep me strong. But here's the kicker. Spices were status symbols. Some scholars say elite tables had the best blends, imported from far-off lands. Others argue even farmers grew herbs in their backyards. Either way, one thing's clear. Spices weren't just food. They were culture. Trade routes brought cumin from the Levant, coriander from Mesopotamia, Every pinch tied Egypt to the world beyond its borders. And let's not forget their spiritual side. Temples burned spices as offerings, believing their scent carried prayers to the gods. Hathor, the goddess of joy and motherhood, got fragrant piles of incense and herbs. So when you sprinkled coriander on your bread, you weren't just seasoning, you were blessing your meal. So next time you grab cumin or coriander, tip your hat to the Egyptians. Thousands of years ago, they were already jazzing up their mornings with spi, blending flavor, health, and ritual into every bite. And hey, if it fueled pyramids and prayers, imagine what it can do for your day. All right, friends, let's take a step back from the honey and dates and dive into something a little less glamorous, but way more essential: the art of food preservation. Today we've got fridges, freezers, and vacuum-sealed bags. But ancient Egyptians, they had to get creative. No Tupperware, no ice boxes, just brains, sun, and a whole lot of ingenuity. And when it came to breakfast, this wasn't just about keeping things tasty. It was about survival. Picture this. You're an Egyptian waking up to a breakfast of bread, fruit, and maybe a hunk of cheese. But what happens when summer rolls in and fresh figs disappear, or when the Nile doesn't flood right, leaving fields dry? That's where the Egyptians shined. They weren't just farmers, they were food hackers, inventing ways to stretch their harvests through heat waves, droughts, and lean seasons. Breakfast wasn't a given, it was a craft. Let's start with the OG method: drying. Dates, figs, grapes, they laid them out on mats under that relentless Egyptian sun until they shriveled into sweet, chewy treasures. No refrigeration, no problem. The heat zapped moisture, locking in flavor and keeping rot at bay. These dried bites were breakfast staples, like nature's candy bars. Imagine biting into a date so sticky it could glue your teeth together. Not fancy, but oh so satisfying when fresh fruit was scarce. Next up, salting. Now fish might not scream breakfast, but salted carp or tilapia, a lifesaver. Egyptians packed fish in salt, letting it cure until it could survive months without a fridge. Near the Nile? Lucky you. You'd tear off a hunk and pair it with bread or stew. Not a daily treat, but a protein punch when the pantry ran low. But here's where it gets really cool: fermentation. Yep, beer again. That thick porridge-like brew wasn't just breakfast. It was ancient probiotic magic. By fermenting barley, Egyptians brewed beer that lasted for weeks, even months. Alcohol, a bonus. Preservation, the real win. Without it, breakfast would have been a lot less liquid. And storage? They were ahead of the game. Clay jars, woven baskets, ceramic pots, sealed tight to keep bugs out and freshness in. Grains, flour, dried fruit, all tucked away like pantry gold. In a desert climate, this wasn't luxury. It was life. So next time you grab a jar of jam or toss dried apricots into your oatmeal, think of the Egyptians. Thousands of years ago, they were already perfecting the art of stretching food through seasons, using nothing but sun, salt, and smarts. Their breakfasts weren't just meals. They were testaments to human ingenuity, and hey, if that doesn't make your toast taste richer, I don't know what will. All right, friends, let's step back from jars and drying racks and dive into something a little more cosmic. We've talked about bread, beer, and honey. But now, let's connect the dots between breakfast and the mythology of ancient Egypt. Because in Egypt, food wasn't just fuel, it was storytelling. Every bite of bread, every sip of beer, every date tucked into your palm. It was a thread in a tapestry of gods, cycles, and the rhythm of life itself. Imagine this: You're an Egyptian waking up to the Nile's golden shimmer. Sunlight spills across your clay bowl of porridge, a hunk of bread, and that ever-present mug of beer. You take a bite and boom, you're not just eating breakfast, you're stepping into a myth, a ritual, a daily dance with the divine. Because to Egyptians, mornings weren't just about shaking off sleep. They were about rebirth. Here's the magic. Breakfast was like a morning handshake with the universe. The sun god, Re, spent every night fighting chaos in the underworld, right? And every dawn, he'd rise again, reborn, triumphant, ready to light up the world. So when you bit into that bread, sipped that beer, you weren't just filling your stomach. You were joining Ra's journey, celebrating the cycle of death, rebirth, and renewal that shaped their entire worldview. And here's where it gets deeper. Food wasn't just eaten, it was offered. Bread, a symbol of life's endless flow. Beer, a liquid prayer to the Nile's power. Even dates, sticky and sweet, were reminders of the land's fertility. These weren't just calories, they were thank yous to the gods. A way to say, hey gods, we're in this together. Whether you were a pharaoh or a farmer, breakfast was your chance to sync with the cosmos. But wait, there's more. Food was also a bridge. Temples offered loaves and beer to the gods, believing the divine would sip the essence and leave the rest for mortals. Families set aside bites at sunrise, whispering thanks for harvests, health, protection, even that humble beer. It wasn't just a drink, it was a love letter to Hathor, goddess of joy and motherhood. For Egyptians, breakfast was a sacred pause, a moment to say, this world, it's alive, and we're part of its story. Historians still debate how much of this was ritual versus routine. Some say elites leaned into the symbolism harder. Others argue even laborers felt the magic. Either way, one thing's clear. Food wasn't just survival. It was a language, a way to talk to gods, ancestors, and the land itself. So next time you pour your coffee or toast your bread, take a beat. Imagine Ra rising behind your window, the Nile's pulse in your cereal bowl. Maybe add a date or drizzle honey. Why not? You're not just eating. You're whispering to the past. And hey, if that doesn't make your toast taste richer, I don't know what will. All right, friends, let's wrap this up with something quiet and reflective. We've wandered through bread, beer, honey, and spices. We've seen how breakfast wasn't just a meal for Egyptians. It was a language, a way to talk to gods, ancestors, and the land itself. And now, as we close this chapter, let's take a deep breath and let it all sink in, because breakfast, it's been whispering stories to us for thousands of years. Think about it. Every bite of bread, every sip of beer, every date they chewed wasn't just food. It was gratitude. A thank you note to the Nile, to Ra's rising sun, to the soil that gave them life. For Egyptians, breakfast was a daily ritual, a moment to say, we're part of this world. We see it. We honor it. And isn't that beautiful? To start your day with reverence instead of rushing through it. But here's the thing. Their rituals weren't just for show. They were woven into the fabric of life. Bread wasn't just carbs. Beer wasn't just drink. They were symbols of life's rhythm, birth, death, renewal. And even today, when you pour your coffee or toast your bread, you're part of that same rhythm. You're not just eating. You're echoing a story older than pyramids. So next time you sit down to breakfast, pause for a heartbeat. Think of the Egyptians. Think of the sun rising over the Nile, of workers breaking bread, of priests offering bowls of beer to the gods. Your morning meal might look different. No barley porridge, no clay bowls, but the essence is the same. Food connects us. It always has. It always will. And maybe, just maybe, add a date or a drizzle of honey. Why not? You're not just eating. You're tapping into a legacy, a tradition that's kept humans nourished, grounded and connected since the dawn of time. So here's to you, the modern Egyptian, the one who knows that breakfast isn't just fuel. It's a love letter to the past, a grounding force in the present, and a bridge to the future. And hey, if that doesn't make your toast taste richer, I don't know what will.